Make me be spontaneous then.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Why?
Yeah. Because sometimes you say ridiculous things.
Oh my goodness. I'll take reckless hyperbole for 200.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back to Sermon Rewind. My name is Todd, and with me is Just Jordan.
Good to be here.
How you doing?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm doing okay.
All right.
So we were grounded in hope yesterday. At least we hope we were.
Yeah.
Right?
Not yesterday. 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Easter Sunday.
There is no time in Sermon Rewind world.
We are lost.
No one knows
ages.
what time of day it is. No one knows what day of the week it is.
That's true.
It doesn't really matter. But let me start there because it was Easter.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit of a question that was kind of related to the sermon, but kind of related to a Facebook post that I wrote on Saturday, which you said that I nailed. Thank you very much. That's
For sure
nice
you
of
did.
I had a number of people yesterday say to me at work, "How was your Easter?" Is that a spiritual question? Is that a biblical question, a theological question, or is that a cultural question?
Yeah, that's an American holiday question.
Okay.
Right? It's like, how was your MLK and how was your President's Day?
So it has very little to do with hope.
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should it be? I mean, should we ask a different question post Easter?
Among Christians, of course. Like there's the thing. Like, we've spent probably the last 20 or 30 years in Christendom trying to do as much as we can to be just like everybody else so that we feel less weird. And I think that's shot us in the foot a bit. Yeah, we should be able to look at each other and with kind of unveiled face say, my goodness, man, how are you doing? Like, resurrection, it's coming.
Right.
So yeah, we don't have to be weird about it, but yeah, we know what we're talking about. We're talking about a hope built in something otherworldly that changes everything. So yeah, of course, I think we should.
Because, one of the things I wrote about was, we have a tendency to say he is risen on Easter morning, which is cool.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, maybe also say it on Monday.
Yeah.
To say that this actually lasted 24 hours. Number of people that told me he is risen on Monday.
Nice.
Want to know? No.
Oh, how many?
How many?
Great. 0?
0.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I think we should start doing that this upcoming Sunday.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how we'll greet.
All right. So again, grounded in hope. The scripture passage was 1 Corinthians 15, verses 12 through 20.
Yeah.
And your big idea was the most difficult and wonderful truth of the Christian faith is that it all hinges on the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any quick comment on that? Why you wrote it?
I think it's utterly true.
Okay. Well, I would hope so.
Well, I think you go into most Easter sermons and people are giving the most sort of lighthearted, beautiful, I don't want to say like puffy, but it's just so, everything's so wonderful. Let's not forget that believing the resurrection is tough.
You use the phrase therapeutic deism.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
All the love passages, the encouragement passages just focus on all the joy.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked about this last week.
Yeah.
I was saying that my hesitancy about Holy Week sometimes is that we kind of build up to Good Friday. We, in some cases, may manufacture sorrow. We may not feel the full weight of Jesus' sacrifice.
That's fair.
And then we want to get past the sorrow really fast because we don't love to dwell in the sadness.
Right.
And then quick get to Easter morning and then whew, now we can be happy again and we can quick do our therapeutic deism sermon and then we can go home and eat ham.
Yeah.
Right? And have our Easter egg.
Make people morally better and happier and make sure they know they're going to heaven and we've done our part.
Yes.
That's not always the case.
I've had people in the past I've heard people critique pastors sometimes for preaching too robust a sermon on Easter morning.
That's terrible.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but it's not uncommon because to your point, sometimes as much as we are supposed to grasp this wonderful truth, we do focus on sort of the pageantry sometimes, right? We want it to be a certain, again, cultural event.
Yeah. Well, you know why I think that is? I don't mean to take this further.
No. Yeah, take it further.
It is
go down a rabbit hole, no pun intended.
It is a weird cultural dynamic where you have leadership often within churches thinking, okay, so here's our strategy. We're going to have lots of new people coming in on Sunday. So we're going to make this as simple. We're going to make this as easy. We're going to make this as non-offending and like joy-filled as possible so that they think this is going to happen every single Sunday and they'll stay.
Right.
I just personally, and this isn't sort of me like, boasting in myself, but I just personally am like, no, I want I want to be brutally honest about everything. So if God graciously keeps them and puts it in their hearts to be disciples and to sort of raise in that discipleship here, that their eyes are wide open to what's coming, right? Like I would much rather have one or two people say, hey, I think this is the life I might want to lead, as opposed to 50 people say, and this is a great place to spend 90 minutes on a Sunday.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Once a year.
Once a year. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and your first point, again, a rare 2-point sermon.
I'm telling you, it happens.
Yes. Point number 1, if the resurrection didn't happen, then we have every reason to mourn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was sitting there thinking, all right, this is, you go back to we were just talking about visitors, right? This point may feel a little different to the visitor versus somebody that's been sitting in the pews the whole time. What do you say to the person? Because I could see people saying, yeah, okay, I get that. That's a conceptual idea, but it did. So why do we care about if it didn't?
So we're talking about the Christian.
We're talking about the person that sat there and sat through, 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 Easter services, and probably heard a similar message and says, yeah, okay, great. We can talk about what ifs all we want, but it did happen. And I know it happened and you know it happened. So let's move on to the next point.
Yeah.
What do you want kind of the longtime Christian to hear in that particular point, that particular mindset?
Yeah, the longtime Christian, I throw myself in that category, even though maybe I don't have the same amount of years as some. I always want to encourage people, and I feel like I say this often, there isn't an expiration date on Scripture. Just because you've heard it before doesn't mean that the Spirit is not still using it actively, in your modern moment to still shape and change you, to make you more and more into His likeness and image. So a long time ago, I personally sort of forsook the idea that, I've heard this before. I've sort of, wrung out everything there is to wring out of it. And I've just opened myself up to the fact that the Spirit is always at work, even if it's old stories that I've heard before. So there's that. And then the other part to it is simple. We have the responsibility to diligently ask ourselves, do we believe this? Because belief is not just, as I say it all the time, it's not just acknowledging information. Like, it's not just people saying, yeah, I've heard it before. Yeah, I buy it. You look at the disciples. It's the reason why this next series starting this Sunday is about going into the eyewitness accounts that followed the resurrection, is because the big question should be, is our life changing as honestly and radically as those who saw them as well? Because you could really pinpoint, if you had two different groups of people, right? You had somebody who was living a normal life, then claimed they saw the resurrection, and their life is nuts afterwards, right? Their life is completely different, upside down. The way they raise their kids, the way they neighbor, the way they offer their lives and their time, their energy, their gifts, all of that is very different. And then you have somebody on the other side of it says, oh yeah, I saw Jesus resurrected too, but nothing changes. They go back to fishing like Peter tried to. You might question one of those over the other. Or in the very least, you might really question the efficacy of what that resurrection accomplished. And so I think it's always important for Christians who are living moderately normal, sort of unchanged lives. I'm not saying that that's any one person here, but we have the responsibility to look at ourselves and say, goodness, do we actually believe this is happening? Like, do we believe it? Because you look at my life and say, I'm not sure that I do. And so I think it is a responsibility of the longtime believer to do some real soul searching, some real digging. Do I believe that we lose nothing and that He will raise us up again on the last day? Because if so, I can give everything.
So that's a good segue into point number 2. And you said, if the resurrection did happen, then we have every reason to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about, people changing, right? I thought it was kind of interesting, and I don't know if you realize you did this, but at the beginning of the sermon, you listed your 2 points, and then you started talking about the big idea, and then eventually you got back into the more unpacked versions of those 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
You verbalized a different version of that point.
Tell me about it.
Okay, so the actual one listed on the screen, if the resurrection did happen, then we have every reason to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you know what else you said?
No. Oh, yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you have, I wrote down both versions. Then we have every reason to lose our minds in celebration.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
That one's a little that's a little, I don't want to say off-putting. That's probably a little frightening for certain people.
Maybe.
Because that sort of suggests that I'm not in control. I'm just footloose and fancy. I mean, I'm just kind of running around.
And that's
that
good
sort of thing.
because I don't want to suggest that. Right. Or
but what does that mean though? I mean, I lose my mind.
Yeah.
Right. I know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you're again saying this is supposed to be a radical change. Even if you've heard this a gazillion times, you should, as you said, do some soul searching and see if you can muster up some actual genuine excitement. For some people, maybe even for the first time, or different types of excitement or whatever. You want someone on a Sunday morning, even if they've heard that sermon all the time, to say, yeah. Right? You get some amens.
Right.
You
Sure.
get some amens on a Sunday morning, almost out of obligation. But you want those
They're
people.
throwing me a bone. Yeah.
Yeah. You want those people after they're done to get up and say, all right.
Yep.
I am excited.
World in front of me. Yes, you're right. Like,
right.
You know me. I don't care about the amens. I mean, it's nice to make sure that people are still awake. But yeah,
it is a little bit of an indicator, is it not?
Sure, that they're paying attention, that it is striking them in the way that it ought to.
Well, because also people have the capacity to get excited about things.
Yes.
You've seen them get excited about things. You're a basketball fan.
I am, and rightly so.
You yell at the TV sometimes.
Terribly.
Jump up and down.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of people jumping up and down, screaming on a Sunday morning.
Sadly, some of that's probably just due to, their perspective on proper decorum. But listen, at the end of the day, like, what makes this text so wildly important is that Paul takes the time to unravel implications, right? Particularly the negative implications of what happens if it's not true. So when at the end of that sermon, I tried to kind of flip those same implications to a positive if it is true, right? And when we start talking about specifically, Todd, who spends more energy, time, money, and effort over the course of their life, especially the older they get, to try to do everything they can to slow death? The answer is everybody, right?
Right.
Imagine the amount of energy and time and effort and thought we put into trying to make sure we're healthy for as long as possible, because everybody, believer or otherwise, there's a part of us that is very unsure and very uncertain about approaching the grave. Now, flip that on its head. If it's true that the resurrection happens, if it's true that you don't lose time with believing family, you don't lose the experiences of, and I try to use some visceral things like the warm breeze coming off the Pacific Ocean, or the sunsets that you loved, or the time with friends and the things that like make life rich and beautiful. If you don't actually lose those, if those are coming back because those are glorious and the Lord loves those things, then the Christian will orient their lives differently, right? In the same way we try to do everything we can to run from the grave, the Christian will do everything they can while on this side of their life to make sure everybody is going into the grave the same way. And so that's what I'm saying. When you say out of your mind, or I say out of our minds excited about this celebratory, lose our minds, right? Like, that should be true, because everything that we've spent our entire lives trying to get away from, we now no longer have to fear. And that should do something. If we really believe that should do something. There should be some real oomph behind that. And so, no, I don't think it's, while there are some who I sure hear that and go, well, here he goes. He's getting all excited for nothing.
Right.
No, I'm getting excited for something. I'm getting excited for something really worth getting excited about. And my expectation, my hope, forget it that I'm a pastor here. My expectation, my hope for other believers who say, yes, this is mine because of what Christ has accomplished, both in his life, death, and resurrection. I expect believers to go out into the world and say, I'm afraid of nothing. I'm losing nothing, because he will raise it up on the last day. I'm expecting that out of us. Otherwise, what do we have to tell anybody about? Like, what do we have at all? You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna fold in a couple questions just in the interest of time. I mean, towards the end, you were talking about the disciples and sort of all of their various ends of their physical earthly life.
Yeah.
And a lot of them died pretty tragically and gruesomely, and yeah. It didn't end well. For those people that are watching The Chosen,
so far it's happy.
So far it's relatively happy. Yeah. They're also, they're all walking around, and yeah, they're a little nervous about certain things, but there's some ends coming for some of them that are not, it's not going to be great TV.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we sort of put that in context? Because I can picture that, and yet I can't. I have no way to sort of put that in any sort of real life application, right? I don't expect to experience that. I don't know a lot of people that have been crucified upside down or anything like that. And I'll sort of pair that with, when we think about that, though, how is it that there are still complaints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask myself that, because I have complaints too. How is it that we still complain about certain things? How is it that we worry about all this little stuff that goes on, procedures in the church and what is and isn't in a worship service, and whether or not we did or did not do things on an Easter Sunday, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How do we have some of that stuff and not just sort of the reckless abandon of celebration? What's going on? What's the barrier?
Well, I think you nailed it in the first part of your question. I think the same answer revolves around both, and that is, we don't have persecution here, especially not in this era of time. We're not face to face with, having to actually believe it. I hate to say it that way. Having to actually look at the evidence and say, this may be my outcome, so I put everything on the line for it. And so what is the natural fallback, right? Like, you have all this time and energy to just kind of sit and stew over the littlest, most insignificant things, right? There's nothing pressing. So we may not have like real life application for the disciples in the sense that no one around us is perhaps being martyred for the faith. But I mean, you can create a real life scenario in the same vein for yourself. Like, Todd, you and every other believer on the planet have to ask themselves, if, granted, it may never happen, but if somebody held a gun to my head, God forbid, and said, you've got an option here. You recant the gospel that I hear you talking about all the time, or I send you to your maker quickly. It is really at that moment that whether or not you actually believe this comes to bear, right? Because you either lose everything, whatever little that you have left, or you gain everything believing that it's there to gain. The reason why the apostles' death is so powerful and such a remarkable evidence is because nobody, if they know that he didn't rise, nobody then forfeits their life. You just don't. Like, you look at Nazi Germany, when they knew that the empire had fell, and they knew that Hitler was no longer alive, what was everybody doing? They were surrendering like it was going out of style. Sure, you had some that still gave up their lives, but that was mostly because of war crimes. They weren't walking out of that. But everybody that could just lay down their arms and walk, they did, and they did it instantly. Because when threat of death was gone for them, they never really believed this. They never really were behind this, by and large. So that's what you're looking at. Peter should have walked if it didn't happen. If he didn't see it, if Paul didn't see Jesus before his very eyes, he should have walked. There is no reason to lose your head over it. The same can be said about us. If we don't believe it, well, we should just be squeezing every little thing of recreation and desire and dream and you name it, every experience we possibly can, and not worry about any of it. Paul says it himself 3 verses after our text. He goes, if this didn't happen, oh my gosh, you kidding me? We set ourselves up to die every day. You should just eat and drink, for the day is short.
Okay.
Says it himself.
Okay, but I get that. But the gun to the head scenario.
Yeah.
Right? Most people are going to say, oh, well, if that does happen, I mean, I'm fairly certain that I will, proclaim that Jesus is my Lord,
okay.
Right? I don't lose anything by believing that I would act a certain way in that type of scenario.
How do you figure?
Because it isn't happening right now. It isn't happening today.
Yeah.
And statistically, it's unlikely to happen, at least where I live and what I do for the rest of my life.
That's fair.
So I can safely say, oh, sure, if I were in that situation, I feel pretty good about the possibility that I would, stick to my beliefs, okay. Right? Give me something that's a little bit more like, what do you want people to do today, post-Easter? Going all the way back to what we talked about, the fact that, yeah, we have all this pomp and circumstance and we do different things on a Easter morning than we normally do on a Sunday. What do you want people to do differently this week that they didn't do last week?
Oh man,
I know that's a big question, a lot of different things, but I mean, just either practically or sort of conceptually. Yeah. What do you want people to do post-Easter?
Practically, to be honest, like I want people to, it's mostly reflection, right? I want people to sit and think not just about the sacrifice and not just about the resurrection, but the implications for it. I want you to take good long looks in the mirror. And I want it to be difficult for you. I want it to be honest and sincere. And I want you to resolve, like in your heart of hearts, am I who I claim to be? And what are the marks of that? Like, if it is true that I am, what are the marks of that? I won't name any names, but I just had a conversation with a parent this last week whose response to their kids' lack of clear and obvious faithfulness, right? They just, in their own words, they don't look or appear or seem like they're following Jesus. And they were really, really offended when I said, okay, tell me about the way that you're raising them. And they stared at me like I was crazy. And I just said, well, no, it's learned behavior, right?
Right.
Like faithfulness, discipline,
How would I know that
discipleship.
your faith is obvious?
Yeah. This, like, do they look at you and say, Mom and Dad really buy this? Our family believes this. I'm going to follow suit or I'm not. Do they have that choice, that sort of fork in the road moment? Like, or are they looking at Mom and Dad and saying, I mean, yeah, they drag themselves to, Sunday morning worship once every 4 weeks or whatever. And we talk a good game when we're around our Bethany folks, but when we're back home, we're just like anybody else. Like, you got to ask yourself those questions. Do my neighbors see me as someone who knows that this is all on Christ? It's like I've hedged all the bets. Do they know that? Do they see that? Does my life reflect that? Because in all the ways that your life doesn't, it is shouting a gospel to everyone around you that you may not want shouted. Like, let the truth of what you believe, let it be, open in the public before all. And may it first be a testimony to yourself. The last thing I'll say about it is Holy Saturday. We had prayer here from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And, Saturday morning at 5:15, I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I do this for so early? This was dumb.
Right.
So, I went over to the church and put on some music and I was there. And there were faithful people that showed up, but probably not until 7:45 or so. And I will say, those 2.5 hours or so before people started coming, I spent a lot of time asking myself that question.
Right.
Here's the lowest possible sacrificial bar. I'm up 3 hours earlier than I want to be. But do I buy this?
Right.
Am I in this moment in between the crucifixion and the resurrection, sort of on the head of a needle, being like, Jesus, oh, the feeling of waiting and longing? And man, in those 2.5 hours, I'll tell you one thing for sure. The Holy Spirit affirmed, yeah, my whole life is hinged on this. It's all on this. And so we need to do that often. Pastors need to do that often. People who are faithfully a part of communities need to do that often. We need to ask this question. Do we buy this? Is everything on this? Are we giving our lives for this end because this is all that matters? And you should be able to know that. You should be able to walk away from that and put your finger on it. So whatever that looks like for you, ask those questions and ask the Lord Jesus to affirm it in you or to convict you where it's not true.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
For sure.
Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind. We hope that you remember, not just on Sunday morning that he is risen, but that you remember it every single day. Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind.
Hope to see you soon.